Hey everyone, welcome to video 3 of the Building Real Front-End series, where we're building a to-do app in levels, starting with a novice level of thinking all the way to a more expert level way of thinking. In video 1, our novice level, we basically recreated the UI that was given to us, which is fine, with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. However, it did not take into account that there would be a database involved in this application down the road. So we were basically just reacting whenever the user did something that should change the UI. We are basically using the UI to determine what is the state of this application. So if the user clicked to change the filter from all to completed to just see the completed to-dos, we had to look at all the different to-dos in the UI and see which ones had the class completed. And then according to that, show or not show certain to-dos. In our next, in our video 2, we did a data-centric approach, which does assume that our data is going to come from a database eventually. And we basically take the approach in video 2 of storing everything that's important regarding the state of the application in JavaScript, and then based on that data, rendering out the UI, which means that our logic to render out the UI will always be the same. All we have to do is update the data objects that are storing the state of the application, and then we kick off all of those rendering functions again, and they've been set up to render out the UI properly. So therefore, this makes it easier for when in the future we want to make more features. We don't have to do as much logic manipulating the UI and stuff. We already kind of have that logic in place. We may have to tweak some things, but in the first approach, every new feature you want to make will require like completely new functions again. So the second approach is not only anticipating a database, but it's also more organized and makes future features easier to accomplish. And that brings us to where we are now. Technically, we've recreated the UI that was given to us. However, our application is not fully functioning yet, right? We have hard-coded our initial data, and I'll show you the other problem here, is that when we make some changes in the UI and then hit refresh, we go back to our initial state that we've basically hard-coded into our application. So none of the stuff that the user has done is being stored, right? That's indicative of a database, and we don't have that yet. So the goal of today's video is to make this a fully functioning front-end application. In the following video, we're going to take it one paradigm level of thinking even higher. However, this is technically all you need to make a fully functioning front-end app. So let's do it. So how do we get a database on the front end? Well, it is time to introduce you to something called local storage. So if you open up your dev tools and you go to, where is it, application. This is for Chrome. It might be something slightly different for Safari or Edge or something, but you'll be able to find it eventually. You could always Google where local storage is in your dev tools for your browser. And then so in local storage, as you can see, Facebook is storing a lot of data on my browser. And I don't know what all these do necessarily, but they all uh, are used by the Facebook app as the app is running. So local storage is something that is often used in our front-end applications. And it is the database that we can use in what we're doing right now to store information about the to-dos and everything. So first, let's introduce how to store things in local storage and how to retrieve things from local storage. So let me cancel all of that. Okay, so by the way, that just cleared everything that was in my local storage for my deployed application because I was probably working on this earlier. So I'll just go down to the bottom of my JavaScript file to do stuff for local storage. So first of all, how do we access local storage? Well, actually, it's very easy. There is a variable called local storage that you inherently have access to in JavaScript that references actual local storage on your browser. The reason this works, local storage, this variable, is because your JavaScript code is running in the browser, and every browser has this concept of local storage. So local storage is an object with method properties. And the only two that we really need to concern ourselves with at the moment are get item and set item. So all we have to do first, there's nothing in there. So first we have to set an item. And what we do to set an item is provide a key and a value. If you remember objects, objects are also a key and a value, right? Where the key is a string and the value can be any data type. So local storage.setItem is very similar, where we provide our key and then our value. And then once we have run this, we see in our local storage, we've provided an entry in there where the key is called key and the value is called value. We could also change this to be 1. Numbers. Things get a little hairy when we want to do objects and arrays and stuff. Let's see what got stored in there. What you have to do with local storage is convert any data that you have that's not numbers or strings. I think Booleans will work as well. So just arrays and objects, you need to convert into what's called JSON. So I have to introduce to you JSON as well. But before I do, let me just show you that all you have to do is this JSON.stringify, which basically, I'll show you what that does first, actually. It basically converts your objects, converts any data that you pass into JSON.stringify into JSON. For numbers, strings, and Booleans, that doesn't really change so much, but objects and arrays, it does a tiny bit. But JSON actually stands for JavaScript Object Notation. So it's basically a format for data that looks a lot like JavaScript objects. So let's look at what JSON.stringify looks like when we have an object of some sort. So let's just create some random object with different things in here. An object of arrays of objects or something. I don't know why I always resort to these same things, but okay, so let's console log JSON.stringify thing. And this is what you get. So thing in JavaScript, normal JavaScript, is an object with properties and whatever. JSON is basically a stringified version of this object. So it looks like this. It almost looks the same. It has the quotations directly in the keys, but otherwise it's pretty similar. But in essence, this is a string. So if I were to store the result of this in a variable, and then console log the type of JSON. Maybe that's the, I shouldn't use that word. JSON bar. Oh, I need type of. You see that the result of stringifying thing into JSON is a string. So that's all. We're basically local storage needs you to store a string. In the result, in the case of number, maybe it converts the number into a string. I'm not sure. I have to check that. But it's just a good practice to always stringify what you're putting in there. If you stringify a string, it's still a string, so there's nothing wrong with that. So, I don't know why it says to use data there. So, basically, we want a variable called data equals whatever. We can always change what that is. And then we JSON stringify the data as we're setting it in local storage. And in order to retrieve something from local storage, all you have to do is local storage.get item, and then you provide the same key. You don't need that second argument. So let retrieved data equal the result of doing local storage.get item. And that's console log the retrieved data. Go back to our console. And as you can see, we've retrieved exactly what we stored. So basically, we use the key to reference where we're storing whatever, and then we use the same key to retrieve it. All right, so very simple. That's all it is. The setting is storing in the database, and the getting is retrieving from the database. So we're going to use this now to add this to our application. So instead of, I'm going to take out all this hard-coded data now. Let's comment it out just to be sure. Just have to check something. So commenting all that out now. Let's say, so we still need a variable called to-dos data. Our application does depend on something called to-dos data. So let me just start it out as an empty array, assuming we don't have any data initially. So let's say that our app is running. Actually, hold on. Do I still have that? Okay, I'll have to rewrite that stuff. So let's say that our app loads. What should our app do? Should it, like, how is our app going to show to-do items that the user has already created in other sessions. In other words, data from other sessions that we stored in some database. Well, local storage is our database, right? So when our application loads, we need to retrieve the data from our database first. It doesn't matter if there's no data there. We have to check, is there data there? And if there is, that's our to-dos data, right? Not this empty array object. We'll only use the empty array object if there's not even anything in local storage yet, which is true when the user has their first session ever, right? The first session ever, they start out with no data. But every next session, they'll probably have some data. So in order to get our data when there is data in there, we have to retrieve from local storage. So let's make a function, or let's just keep it nice and simple and just say that, let me comment that out for a sec and say let to-dos data equal local storage dot get item, and then we have to decide what our key is going to be. I'll just call it data, and that will be our to-dos data. And let's console log what we have right now. So we have null, and later in our application, we're using this variable to-dos data as if it's an array. So we can't have to-dos data be null because we're gonna try to access like different items inside of to-dos data. Like a method property unshift is a method property of an array, not null. So we can't keep to-dos data as null. So what we do is we say if to-dos data, let's say if let data, okay, if to-dos data is null, there's a couple ways we can write that. We can do this, or we can just say if not to-dos data. Then we say to-dos data equals an empty array. And then from there on, our application will work just fine. Ideally, let's see. So everything's working properly. Now there's an easier way to write this, which is the following. So basically we're saying to-dos data is going to be equal to getting data from local storage. Otherwise, meaning the otherwise will only happen if this guy returns null, basically. So if not, if this does return null, then we set to-dos data equal to an empty array. So what does this mean a little bit more specifically is this is a OR operator. I believe the term is operator. So it's logical, right? So basically what it's going to do is check if this is true or false. And null is inherently false. Like if I just said if null, console.log truthy, else console log falsy, we get falsy, meaning null inherently is false in a conditional type scenario. And this line here is conditional. It is basically checking if this is true. And if it's not true, then we're going to use this. It's a little weird, but it's just a syntax that came to be in JavaScript, you know, at a certain version in the iterations of JavaScript to make our lives easier as developers. As syntactically, we were able to write this on one line rather than four, which I just had before. So something to try to remember more and more over time, but if you have to do it in the previous way I just did it, there's no problem with that. You'll get these tricky methods as you keep coding. So now we have our to-dos data coming from local storage, if there is any data in local storage. Otherwise, we're just starting it out as an empty array, which is what it should be, you know, for the user's first session before they've ever stored anything in our local storage. Okay, so now we don't need all of our to-dos data that we hard-coded before. And now our application is halfway there. We're getting, supposedly, the data that's stored in local storage. However, we're not storing anything there yet. So when do we store stuff in local storage? Well, every time we create a new to-do, every time we update a to-do, because remember, in the data that we are going to store in there, we are going to, when we create a to-do, we're going to generate an object where we generate an ID property. We're going to grab whatever text the user typed and also put completed as false. And when the user modifies the to-dos, we're probably going to be changing whether or not it's completed, or we're going to be removing it completely from to-dos data. So in that sense, regardless of which of those actions we took, we need to store the newly updated to-dos data into local storage every time we update the data. So let's look at where that is. So the mode, actually, let's do mode first. Let's assume that, as I mentioned in the previous video, we may want to allow the user to have preferences. So, let's say that that is the case, and we want to allow the user to store in the database what mode they want to use by default, the default mode, light mode or dark mode. So instead of, oh, I actually wrote a little bit of logic here last time. A function get theme from database, a hypothetical function. Well, now we can actually write this function. So basically, we have to local storage dot get an item, let's call it theme, from our local storage. Let's say that we had an item called theme. We want to grab that, but if that's not there, then we want to default to light theme, and then we return the theme that we got, or the default one. Okay, so now that's our current theme. And so continuing with the mode, let's finish the mode since it's the simplest thing. So basically, we are taking account of what the current theme is and then toggling it. And then we are setting the document body class name to the theme that we've just toggled to. Now, to store the theme that the user has currently decided to use in the database or in our local storage, we have to local storage.setItem theme, because remember we're using theme as the key for the data related to the theme that the user is using. And then we store the current theme, which is the new theme that has just changed. So now, when I change the theme to dark mode, we end up storing dark mode in local storage. So see, we have theme in here called dark theme. So now, when I refresh the screen, this function is going to run again, right? And what it's going to do is first check local storage for the item theme, which is now there. And that's the theme that we're going to set as the current theme. And then we're going to document body class name dark theme. See, now I'm refreshing the page and we're staying on dark mode. So that is more realistic for an application, assuming that you wanted the user to be able to do that. Of course, we want the user to store to-dos. Whether we want the user to store the mode is debatable. Why not? But not the most important thing. But I just wanted to do that one first because it's easy to see. So again, we stored the theme. Every time we toggle the theme, we store what the theme is now in the database under the key theme. And then whenever we refresh the page and run grabbing the theme from the database, that's what we do. We get the theme that we've stored from local storage, and that's our theme. Okay, so let's do now to-dos or form filters. Let's see. Let me see my filter logic to see if that would be easier, so then we can work up to the hardest one, which is to-dos. Okay, so filter. So why don't we just do filters first, because I assume it will be less work. Because all we have to do is similar to mode, there's two modes. Well, filters, there's three. So all we want to do with filters is store. So we don't, again, this is not something we have to do in our application, but let's say that when the user refreshes, we want them to continue from what filter they were on last. So if the last filter they were looking at was the active filter, then when they refresh, we'll take them to initially start on the active filter. Again, this is not something we might want in our app. Maybe, maybe not. It's debatable, but we're just doing this as practice, basically. more practice with local storage. So my stuff regarding filter, I believe, starts on this line where I grab the selected filter and I'm defaulting what that filter is to all. Now, if you are taking note of this pattern, instead of just defaulting to all, what do we want to do before? If you have to, pause it and think about it. But what we have to do is now that we're assuming we're storing the last filter that the user was on in the local storage, we want to when we initialize our app, we want to check what is in local storage first and see if there's anything there. So we want to get our filter, let's call it, from local storage. So we'll call the key for the filter that the user was last on. We'll call the key filter for local storage. And if that exists, then we are setting our selected filter to what we stored in local storage, which is again the last filter the user was on. If we don't have that information stored, then we default to all. And okay, so now we have to set the filter in our local storage. So when do we do that? Well, it's every time that we change our filter, which is when we click a filter. If the clicked filter is not equal to the selected filter, we're changing filters. So when that happens, we not only have to render the new to-dos that we're supposed to see for that new filter and update the filter UI, making this blue and this gray, but we also need to now set this information in local storage. And what the filter that we're going to set in local storage is the clicked filter. So now when I change to active, again, let's look at our local storage. Now we have something called filter, and we've set active because that is the clicked filter. And now when I refresh, okay, that didn't work. Let's see. I mean, the filter is correct. Selected filter is probably accurate. Let's see. So selected filter is correct. So the problem is probably that we are not updating our filter UI on the initial load of our application. So I'm checking now to see if I run update filter UI. Like right now we define the function and then we only run update filter UI when a filter is clicked. But we also need to run this function now even before any functions are called. So that, if you remember, that logic is down here. So basically, we're updating the items left, we are rendering our to-dos out, and we're updating our filter UI immediately when this JavaScript runs for the first time, before the user starts clicking things. So now, when I run update filter UI on the initial load of the application, now you can see that it has properly selected the right filter in the UI. So that is filter. And let me check if it works when I have to-dos in here. So let's try completed now. Then I refresh, and that didn't work. And it did not work probably because render to-dos is not properly taking into account what the current filter is. Let's see. It actually should, I believe. Okay. Oh, to-dos data. Ah, yes. The problem is that we have not yet started storing our to-dos data, so when I refresh the page, the to-dos that I've created are still not existing in local storage. So when I refresh, they're gone, regardless. So that's the problem right now. Otherwise, I think that the filter is going to be fine as it is. It's going to work once our to-dos get stored in the database as well. So let's work on that now. So first of all, we have our getting of the to-dos. Actually, I shouldn't call this data. Let's call it to-dos. So I have to set the to-dos data every time we update the data regarding our to-dos. So where's all that data or all that data manipulation? Well, here we are creating a new to-do, right? So we check if the to-do that the person typed has any text. Okay, so basically we to-do data.unshift, so we add the new to-do that the regarding what the user typed, and then we render our to-dos out. We also want to set, and now in our local storage, localstorage.set item, we want to set our to-dos to be JSON.stringify to-dos data. So we've updated to-dos data. We've added an object into what was previously an empty array, right? I say empty because we don't have any items yet. And then I JSON.stringify that because remember we have to JSON.stringify an array or an object. So now when I create a new item, let's look at our local storage. And now you can see that we have a item called to-dos, and the value for that is an array with one object in there. And that object has the ID, the text that we just typed, and completed false. All right, so now when I refresh, it didn't work. Why is that? Let's console log to-dos data, make sure that worked okay. And it did. However, to-dos data.filter is not a function in line 157. I wonder why they're saying that. When we get the item from the local storage, remember when we stored to-dos, the data for to-dos, it got JSON.stringified. I forgot to do the other half of JSON.stringify. So when you JSON.stringify, you convert the array or the object or whatever into a string. What you want to do is when you retrieve that string, that JSON from local storage, you have to convert it back into an array or object. So you want to actually do what's called JSON.parse. So we parse the string back into a JavaScript. So let's do that here. So let's say we have an object, and then we JSON.stringify our object, JSON str. So JSON stringified the object looks like this. Now we want, let's say that this is what we store in local storage. When we retrieve it, we have to parse. JSON.parse the JSON string. And now let's look at our parsed JSON. We have the object that we initially wrote. So that's all we're doing is storing as JSON and retrieving it and parsing that back into JavaScript again. So what we have to do is basically get the to-dos data string from here. Okay, I was trying to do this more simply, but basically we can just wrap JSON.parse around this idea of local storage.getting the item to-dos. So basically we try to get the item to-dos and then we JSON parse it. If you do JSON parse of null, you get null. So there's no problem here with JSON.parsing the result of local storage get item to-dos, regardless of what's here or not here. This is either going to be truthy or falsy accurately based on if there's information here or not. If there's information here, then to-dos data will be the result of JSON.parsing local storage.get item to-dos. If this is falsy, then we store an empty array in to-dos data. And as you can see, we now have the item we created. So that's good news. However, now if I toggle these guys, when I refresh, we go back to the to-dos that we created, but we never updated the data in local storage after toggling these guys. Also, if I delete them, we are back to this again because we never updated the data in local storage. So when we refresh, we are grabbing what's in local storage. So we always have to keep what's in local storage current. So every time we change anything related to the data, we have to update that in local storage. So I'm just going to copy this line because we're going to use it in various places. Display to-dos is all about displaying in the UI, so that's okay. Filters, render to-dos, to-do click handler. So we're going to want to do it here. So when we click the delete button, we're removing something from to-dos data. When we click anything other than the delete button, so anything else in the to-do, we're toggling it, right? So regardless of which one we do, we have updated to-dos data in one way or another. So all we have to do is after either of them, which is why I'm not putting them in either if clause, we're going to do this regardless of which if clause gets fired, we're going to set to-dos again based on the new to-dos data. And I wonder if there's anything else I even have to do. Clear completed as well. When we clear the completed to-dos, we want to also set the new to-dos data under our key to-dos in local storage. And I think that should be all, honestly. Let's try. So when I refresh now, as you can see, the data has been stored. And if I delete this guy, still the case. If I delete that guy, still the case. Let's say I start on completed, I create a new to-do, whatever. Oh, that didn't update, so I need to fix that. But, okay, refresh. Everything's generally working. I just noticed, however, that, let's see, if I create a new item, items left isn't updating, so that's not good. So we want to make sure we're running update items left when we create a new to-do. So when I create a new to-do is right here. And I don't see myself running update items left. Oops. Running update items left anywhere. So after I've created the new to-do, I need to update the items left there. And now it should be working okay. I'm in here, create new to-do. Okay, good. So look, everything's working now. 2 items left. Go here, clear completed. So as you can see, we now have a fully functioning app because if I were to clear, so like if I clear everything from local storage, we assume that this is the first time the user is ever using our application. So this is our default state here. We have light mode, we have no to-dos, we're starting on the all filter. Once the user starts interacting with our application, messing with things, going to dark mode, when they refresh, meaning they come back, theoretically, this is what they get, is where they're left off. So we now have a fully functioning front-end application, just like that. And I just want to offer now a word of encouragement that this is actually all the information that you need to build a fully functional front-end app that you can deploy live and that you can get people using. I want to show an example of a game that I play. That is an example of an app that is fully front-end. There's no back-end involved. And that is this game 2048. How do I know that there's no database involved? Because I never created an account on this website. So they're not storing my user account in any way. All that they're doing in order to store the best score, the current board, see it when I refresh, all that stuff is still the same, is they use local storage. See? They have best score right there. So I just wanted to offer this as a word of encouragement that you can make very popular front-end apps without a database and stuff and make money off of them. This guy, I don't know how much money he's made. I know he used to show ads on this website. Maybe he's transitioned to this donate button. But anyway, it's just proof that everything that I've taught so far is all you need to actually build a front-end application that could be popular and legitimate. So with that, I hope you liked the video and I hope it's expanding your mind about how to build apps on the front end. And I think the next one will be amazing. So I recommend that you do watch it. We're going to take this code, clean it up, and refactor it to use an even higher paradigm level of thinking. Please leave a comment if you have any questions for clarifications or any follow-up questions based on what I did here today. Please subscribe and we'll see you in the next one.